About a year ago, I started to feel like parts of my brain were beginning to atrophy. During the onslaught, which is how I sometimes refer to the almost daily waves of bad news and trauma we've all been subjected to, if not directly affected by, since November 2016, I've had a hard time concentrating sometimes for long stretches, which is something I've never had a problem with before. And this has been especially true since COVID started. As a consequence, I stopped reading the kinds of books that had always been a really important part of my life, and I started to read more accessible things like murder mysteries. This is not a diss. I love murder mysteries, but they don't exactly feed my soul. It wasn't enough, though, and in February, I decided to reread Henry James's novels because I felt like I was losing more brain cells. So I started with James because although his prose is dense and challenging, the narratives are still pretty straightforward, and his stories are further removed, for the most part, from our troubled history than the works of, say, William Faulkner or Toni Morrison, who are two of my favorite writers. I first fell in love with James after reading The Portrait of a Lady and The Golden Bowl in college for fun. And since then, with the exception of a few early novels, I read everything he wrote, including all of his short stories and his collected letters. So by the end of February, I'd gotten through his first seven novels because I read them chronologically, and then I started on the Bostonians, which I'd never read before. This is ostensibly about a love triangle. Basil Ransom is a Southern conservative, and Olive Chancellor, his cousin, is a Bostonian feminist, and they are vying over the affections of the heiress Verena Tarrant. Ransom came north after the war, and his family has lost its fortune in order to jumpstart his career as a lawyer. The fundamental problem with the novel, or at least my fundamental problem with the novel, is that Ransom sided with the Confederacy. He supported secession because his family owned other human beings, and they wanted to continue to be able to do so. Early on in the novel, it becomes clear that as distasteful as his northern counterparts might find his politics, Ransom is going to be welcomed into their drawing rooms and at their dinner parties, despite the fact that he is both an unreconstructed racist and an enemy of America. I love Henry James' work for many reasons, but in part because of his innate and deep understanding of the complexities and limits of human relationships, including our relationships to ourselves. But once Ransom is accepted and normalized, I had to put the book down. The man was an unrepentant monster, in my view, who believed thoroughly in his lost cause and the lost cause, even though that isn't what it was called at the time. And he regrets the war not because he has an epiphany about the egregiousness of what he willingly participated in, but because he and his family were ruined by it. The failures of Reconstruction are legion, or it's actually more accurate to say the failures of white, mostly Republican Northerners to fulfill the promise of Reconstruction are legion. And one seed of those failures was the ostensibly simple act of allowing these serial killers a place at the table without question or consequence after the Civil War ended. I grew up with my own serial killers, using the term loosely and metaphorically, of course. And even if I didn't know that's who they were, I had inklings from a very young age. I didn't know what the racism and the homophobia and the misogyny were at first, but I did see the cruelty, and I made myself as small as possible so I never became a target of it. There was no need, of course, for me to bother doing that because as a girl and as my father's daughter, I was of absolutely no consequence to them, which was its own kind of cruelty, I suppose. But as I got older, and recognized the extent of my family's bigotry, I still said nothing. I pretended it was all just fine because they were my family, and what else was I supposed to do? I even allowed myself to become close with a couple of them long after I knew better. And that's how accommodation starts. We grow up with the unacceptable and the unbearable, and accommodation becomes a tool we use to make our lives easier. Accommodating the unacceptable and the unbearable is more often than not easier than doing the right thing. And then it becomes habitual. Eventually, we use it to let ourselves off the hook, because that's easier too. Maya Angelou made doing the right thing look easy. Quote, "The negative lives," she said. "And if you allow it to perch in your house, in your mind, in your life, it can take you over. So when the rude or cruel thing is said, the lambasting, the gay bashing, the hate, I say, take it all out of my house. Those negative words climb into the woodwork and into the furniture, and the next thing you know, they'll be on my skin," unquote. She would not allow poison and vulgarity in her house, and any racial or sexual pejorative is designed to make a person less than, she said, and that kind of hateful disregard seeps in, leaps from one person to the next. One isn't necessarily born with courage, Angelou told us, but one is born with potential. Without courage, we cannot practice any other virtue with consistency. We can't be kind, true, merciful, generous, or honest. She counseled us to do one courageous thing in a small way. From there, do another, and then another, until finally you can say without hesitation to the bigoted and the cruel, "No, not in my house you don't." This country is our shared home. If right now it feels as though it's been invaded by vandals, it has. The serial killers aren't just the people who've been pardoned and released from prison. They're the people currently occupying the seats of power and doing the pardoning. It's inexcusable for those who know better to normalize them, but it's unconscionable to accommodate them. Too many Democrats are playing that game, and what we need to do, what we need to admonish them to do, is start saying, take it all out of my house. And then maybe we can move forward. Like the Boston socialites and suffragettes who invited Basil Ransom into their drawing rooms, we know exactly who these people are. If we remain naive enough to give them the benefit of the doubt or extend them any grace, we will be punished, and we will continue to be punished. For over a year, our leaders told us how dangerous another Trump administration would be. They warned us about the encroaching fascism that was poised to throttle our democracy. But as soon as our side lost, many of these people relinquished much of the power they still possessed, or they exited the stage or chose to become accommodationists to one degree or another. I've been calling Donald and his followers sycophants and enablers fascists publicly. It's deeply depressing to have been proven right, but so much worse that over 74 million Americans either did not believe the evidence right in front of them or simply didn't care. But here we are. Those who understand the gravity of the situation, who acknowledge that the leaders of the party in power are indeed fascists, should never accommodate them, never lift a finger to make their lives more comfortable, never make their dark work easier. You would think that the least we could ask of them, for the sake of human decency, is that they never shake their hands, never invite them in. I never would.